For 3 months, I followed the rule about never making eye contact with the Empress, until she cornered me in an empty corridor and commanded me to look at her, and when I finally met those violet eyes, I saw 200 years of loneliness from never being truly seen. Ethan Cole wiped his brow and straightened his uniform as he began another morning patrol. 3 months had passed since the briefing that drilled into him one simple rule: do not make eye contact with Empress Valeri. A Velthane. He was to be an invisible guardian, always vigilant, but unobtrusive. Ethan's heart raced. Every time she walked by, his gaze would drop instantly, as her presence filled the air like a storm front. They felt different. As he rounded yet another corner of the labyrinthine Imperial Palace corridors, something about the quiet hallways made him uneasy. He stopped abruptly when Empress Valeri appeared before him at the end of the corridor. She was alone and seemingly unmoving, her white hair cascading down her shoulders in stark contrast to the silver sheen of her skin. "Your Majesty," Ethan stammered reflexively, dropping his eyes immediately. "I did not expect Valeri." The Velthane took a step forward, cutting him off mid-apology. Her voice was calm yet authoritative when she spoke. "Look at me." Ethan's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. He had trained for this moment, the one where the rules might crumble under pressure. His military instincts screamed to comply, but his cultural knowledge demanded caution. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," Ethan said hesitantly, eyes darting back up towards her face before quickly returning downward. "I must." Her hand waved dismissively, and she leaned slightly forward. "Look at me now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the full weight of this command. The protocol briefing had been clear about avoiding eye contact with royalty, but Valeri, it was not just any royal. Her gaze carried immense cultural significance, a challenge to enemies or an entreaty from suitors. He raised his eyes slowly, meeting hers for what felt like an eternity before they snapped back down to the floor. "I am not understanding your command," he stammered weakly, trying desperately to follow rules etched into him years ago. The Empress took another step closer, her hand rising to rest gently on his shoulder. Ethan flinched involuntarily at this intimate gesture from a woman of such high status. "I am commanding you," she said softly but firmly. "Look me in the eye." Ethan hesitated for just one more heartbeat before lifting his eyes again. The violet depths met him like mirrors, reflecting loneliness, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. "You are looking at me, Valeri," he stated simply, as though her tone alone could make it so. She continued without pause. "You see, it is not forbidden because I am unapproachable, but rather due to a misunderstanding about my position." Her voice cracked with emotion when she added, 200 years of being looked around and through. She moved closer still, until they were nearly face to face despite his formal posture. Ethan found himself struggling to maintain eye contact under her piercing stare. It was as if he could see into the depths of time itself. "Untouchable, Valeri," he whispered, drawing back slightly but maintaining their connection with intent blue eyes that no longer averted from hers. "Unseeable, yet here you are." She paused, then stepped away entirely. "You have seen me." Ethan watched her walk down the corridor until she was out of sight around yet another corner, leaving him standing there, heart pounding in his ears and mind racing with questions. In that moment he understood more than just a rule. He had witnessed something profound about isolation and connection. The realization settled heavily within him as adrenaline faded into confusion and curiosity, mixed together like a storm brewing beneath the surface of calm waters. He knew one thing for certain: he would never forget those violet eyes or what they revealed. The days after were strange for Ethan Cole. A steady routine punctuated by an unshakable awareness. He could not stop thinking about those violet eyes and the weight they carry, yet a loneliness that cut deeper than any physical separation ever could. Each day as he patrolled the palace corridors, his gaze would unconsciously drift toward Empress Valeri, Velthane, whenever she passed him in her grand procession or simply moved through a crowded hall alone. He tried to follow protocol meticulously. It was a part of who he was, disciplined and obedient to rules that kept everyone safe. Yet now, Every time his eyes would flicker past hers, the emptiness behind those deep violet irises echoed back at him with an intensity that pierced through his resolve like never before. The palace corridors were bustling yet silent in a peculiar way. Conversations around Valeri seemed muted and hollow, as if even the air refused to carry her voice properly. She spoke to empty spaces, to ghosts of unmet gazes floating just out of reach, a quiet testament to the isolation she endured despite being surrounded by thousands. Ethan saw it all now, how everyone looked past her, their eyes sliding away from hers like water off a surface too hot for contact. Every time he thought about it, his heart clenched with a strange mix of empathy and dread. The protocol was clear: breaking eye contact rules could end in severe punishment, but the weight of what Valeri had revealed stayed heavy on him nonetheless. She needed to be seen, truly acknowledged, as more than just royalty or an emblem of power. Ethan knew he should leave it alone, forget that moment in the corridor, but he couldn't shake off the image of her reaching out and then stepping back when she realized how much his mere glance had meant to her. There was something compelling about breaking those centuries-old rules for a chance at genuine connection, something so rare yet essential. So there he found himself again, standing alone in the same corridor 3 days later. The echo of their previous exchange lingered around him, like an unsaid promise hanging heavy between them both. As expected, Valeri approached soon after, her steps measured and purposeful, as if she too felt this odd pull toward him. "Your Majesty," he greeted her formally once more, though his eyes rose deliberately to meet hers before settling back down obediently, both a challenge and an invitation wrapped into one glance. She stopped when their gazes locked again. "You came back." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Valeri," his voice wavered slightly as she continued, "I told you no one sees me." He interrupted gently but firmly, cutting through her words like a calm wave against the tide of protocol around them both that seemed wrong. "You are surrounded by people, but unseen." She was quiet for a moment, then asked quietly, "You could be executed." His breath caught in his throat, but he shook it off resolutely and met her gaze again firmly. "I am not challenging you. I'm witnessing you." His voice wavered slightly under the weight of this new understanding. "Valeri," tilted her head curiously. "Witnessing?" Ethan explained, trying to find words that might make sense across their cultural divide. In human culture, sometimes acknowledging someone's existence is a profound act. It shows they matter. She stared at him for long seconds, as if weighing his sincerity against the risk he was taking. "You have been invisible for 200 years, Ethan finished solemnly. Silence filled the corridor like an uncomfortable fog around them both until Valeri stepped closer, stopping mere inches away from where he stood. Her hand reached out again to touch his face, this time, though there wasn't a flinch, only acceptance and understanding in her gaze as she asked quietly, "Why are you doing this?" "Because I saw loneliness," Ethan replied honestly, "and I know what it feels like." Valeri searched his features for longer than the few seconds allowed by protocol before whispering softly back, "Come to my chambers tonight." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He should refuse, walk away now that Shed revealed the danger of this connection. "Yes," Ethan found himself nodding solemnly. She almost smiled, then stepped back and left him standing there once again. His mind raced with all the reasons why walking into her chambers was a terrible idea, yet still felt like an irreplaceable choice to see someone who had been alone for so long, even if it meant risking everything in return for that glimpse of humanity beneath the surface. The corridor echoed hollowly around him as he watched Valeri move away down the hallway. This time, when she disappeared into another room, Ethan knew his path was set, no matter how dangerous it might become, because sometimes seeing someone who has been invisible is the only thing left to do in a world that Valeri awaited for him at her door, not in imperial robes, but dressed in something softer, more human somehow. She gestured silently, "Sit." He obeyed without hesitation, and took a seat on one of the elegantly carved chairs before her desk. The chamber was simple yet opulent, an unexpected contrast to what he had come to expect from Velthane's grandeur. She began quietly, breaking the silence between them. I have been ruling this empire for 200 years. Her voice carried a depth that belied its calm exterior. For 2 centuries, I have stood in front of people who look through me. She paused as if remembering something long buried, but painful to recall. Everyone wants something from my title, me power, but no one sees me, she continued, her gaze shifting towards him with an intensity he hadn't seen before. No one cares about the woman I am. Her voice cracked slightly at this admission, revealing a vulnerability that left Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, meeting those piercing violet eyes. I do, he said simply. You asked me to look, and so I will. She blinked slowly, clearly surprised by his directness, then nodded stiffly, as if steeling herself for what was coming next. Tell me about Earth, she requested quietly. Ethan smiled slightly at the unexpected question. On Earth, we connect through eye contact. He recounted tales of bustling markets and crowded streets, where every glance held some meaning or another, whether it was acknowledgement between strangers or affection shared among friends. She listened intently, asking questions that probed deeper into his world. Yet there were moments when her mind wandered back to the isolation she spoke about earlier. Those times Ethan noticed how her eyes would lose focus, and an almost imperceptible sadness crept over her features. Do humans always look at each other? Valeri, finally asked after what felt like hours of conversation. Ethan nodded. Eye contact is a basic part of human connection. We look into the eyes of people we care about. Valeri fell silent then, turning away from him for the first time since he arrived at her hand reaching up to rest lightly against her forehead, as if trying to push back an invisible weight pressing down on her thoughts. No one cares about me, she repeated softly, almost to herself. They all want something from my title, but they do not see who I am. Tears welled in the corners of her eyes, tears Ethan suspected had never been shed before in front of another being for centuries. He reached out without hesitation and took hold of her hand, feeling a jolt run through both as his fingertips made contact. She startled at first. You should not, but when he held on tightly she seemed to falter momentarily against the strength holding on to hers so firmly. I see someone who has been alone for 200 years, Ethan whispered gently, squeezing her hand reassuringly before pulling it closer still until they were almost touching palms. I see a woman starving for genuine connection. Valeri, his breath hitched, and she stared at him openly now with wide eyes brimming over with unshed tears, each drop glistening like precious diamonds against her pale skin. Why do you care? She asked, voice trembling slightly, as if afraid of the answer yet hoping desperately it might be true. You have known me for days. Ethan held his gaze steady, because when I looked at your eyes today and saw how much they needed someone to acknowledge them. He trailed off softly, then met her gaze once more firmly. I see a woman who asked me to look despite knowing the risks involved, because she wanted, more than anything else in this world, to be seen. His words hung between them like an unspoken promise, binding him further into whatever might come next, no matter how dangerous it proved to be for either of them, together now or separately, alone after. She was crying openly by thankfully, for the first time under his steady gaze and warm touch. It seemed so foreign yet somehow right in this moment, where rules didn't hold any sway over emotions finally released from centuries worth of restraint imposed upon her existence, here within these walls, filled with people, but none seeing who she truly was. Valeri, it touched his face hesitantly then, the action sending another jolt through both their systems, as if sparking something long dormant and now reignited under this mutual recognition of each other's presence. If I make you my consort, she whispered softly, against him suddenly, after holding her breath for those few seconds lingering there in contact with one who finally Empress, Krath began, voice dripping with barely contained fury. You announce this? A consort from a human world? He glared at Ethan, who remained rooted to the spot beside Valeri, their hands entwined, though they had yet to fully understand each other's culture and traditions. Valeri turned towards him, her violet eyes piercing through Krath's facade of authority. "High Chancellor," she said calmly but firmly, releasing Ethan's hand only momentarily, as if it were a lifeline anchoring them together. She placed both hands on the podium before addressing everyone present. "I have chosen my consort." Chancellor Krath stepped forward, his expression tightening further. "This is unprecedented," he stated accusingly to Ethan. Ethan lifted his chin slightly and met the Chancellor's glare without flinching. He did not back away from anyone in defense of Valyrie. It was a rule he had broken once today, but would break again if necessary. "I looked at her when she asked," he said firmly, interrupting Krath's heated speech before it could begin. Krath snarled, anger radiating off him like heat waves on the desert plains. "The prohibition exists for a reason, Valyrie." The cut across him sharply with a single, commanding word: silence. The hall fell into an uneasy silence as she turned back to face everyone assembled. Her tone softened when addressing them, but held unwavering conviction nonetheless. "The prohibition against looking at me is a tradition created from fear," Valyrie explained gently yet insistently. "My ancestors were afraid of connection, intimacy, vulnerability inherent in acknowledging the humanity within one another." She paused momentarily, gathering her thoughts, as though steeling herself for what she was about to say next. "Eye contact became forbidden not because it is dangerous, but because they feared genuine human interaction and its implications," Valyrie continued. "They wanted people to avoid me out of respect or fear instead of engaging in the kind of emotional intimacy that makes us feel seen." Chancellor Krath sputtered indignantly at these words, clearly uncomfortable with being contradicted so openly by his Empress, a position he had held for many years now, and one which Valyrie herself was breaking precedent to share publicly. "I stood here for 2 centuries, she continued quietly but confidently, "never truly seen by any, not even the people closest around me, because of this tradition." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, a silent offer of support as Valyrie turned back towards him, determination etched across both their faces. "The traditions have kept me isolated and miserable," Valyrie stated definitively. Chancellor Krath opened his mouth to protest once more but was cut short by the look in Valyrie. His eyes a mixture of defiance and sorrow that dared anyone present to challenge her further on this matter she had waited 200 years to address. The hall remained silent, as if waiting for someone else to speak or take action. "This human," Valyrie began softly yet firmly, turning her gaze fully towards Ethan now with an intensity that left no room for misunderstanding about who she meant by these words, and why they mattered so much more than any rule could ever enforce otherwise. "He broke the prohibition when I asked him to, and in doing so," her voice trailed off slightly, but only because what came next was clear, without saying she felt seen. Chancellor Krath's eyes narrowed further, if possible, before a reluctant acceptance seemed to creep over his features, though clearly he wasn't happy about it still by far. "This sets an extremely dangerous precedent," he mumbled half-heartedly, under breath, now having been thoroughly silenced once again in public forum where no one could challenge what she had said. Valyrie turned back fully towards him then with unwavering eyes, her next statement leaving no room for further debate. "The traditions are keeping us from seeing each other truly. I will not apologize for choosing to be seen." Ethan stepped forward slightly, now standing shoulder to shoulder beside Valyrie, instead of just holding her hand, as if symbolizing his support and shared belief in this momentous change more explicitly than before. She took Ethan's hand publicly again, then stepping closer so their bodies nearly touched despite the crowd around them. "I will not apologize for choosing to be visible," she declared once more firmly, now with a glance back at Krath, clearly daring him to challenge her further on any point here, since it had already been done, and would continue regardless. The ceremony was simple yet profound, Velthane traditions interwoven seamlessly.